Perseus, Part 3 from Stories of Old Greece and Rome, public domain reading. The great joy of Andromeda's father was equaled only by the young mother's happiness over her rescued child, and they welcomed the young hero Perseus, who had saved her daughter from so terrible a fate. So when Perseus had been royally entertained for several days, the king bade him demand any reward that he wished for his heroic services. The youth boldly asked for Andromeda's hand in marriage, and to this the parents gladly consented, although she was already betrothed to her uncle, Phineus, and the preparations were begun at once for the wedding. While the marriage celebrations were in progress, the jilted suitor, who had been too timid to attempt any rescue of Andromeda, he now came forward to claim his wife. His pretensions, however, were laughed at, and he left the court angry and plotting revenge. The following day he appeared with a band of his followers, and they suddenly attacked Perseus, who had barely any time to defend himself. The friends of young hero rallied to his support, but they were outnumbered by the attacking party, and a disastrous battle might have ensued had not Perseus bethought himself of a sure means of defense. Catching up the cloak in which he had wrapped the Gorgon's head, he cried, Whoever is my friend, let him turn away his eyes." The courtiers of King Cepheus and the men fighting around Perseus obeyed him, but Phineus and his father and his followers believed this to be a mere trick to gain time, and they looked on while Perseus unveiled the Medusa's snaky head. Some of the gazers had their spears in uplifted hands. Some were fitting arrows to their bows as they turned their eyes a moment toward Perseus. But in whatever position they stood, just so they were suddenly turned into stone. By some chance, Phineus had been watching his men instead of looking at the Gorgon's head, and when he saw their dreadful transformation into stone, he fell on his knees before Perseus, and with outstretched hands implored the hero to spare his life. But Perseus forced him to look upon the hideous face of Medusa, and he too became a stone image, with averted head and supplicating arms. Having thus disposed effectively of his enemies, Perseus covered up his death-dealing trophy, and the wedding ceremonies were resumed. Later he departed with his bride to the country of Polydestes, where that king had been keeping his mother a prisoner until she would consent to marry him. He had long believed Perseus dead, and was therefore much astonished to see him appear unharmed and victorious. Hearing of the cruel treatment his mother had received from Polydestes, the young hero determined on a swift revenge. In the presence of the king and his court, he suddenly displayed the head of Medusa, and the whole company, just as they stood, were turned into stone. Then Perseus set sail with his wife and mother for his own country. But before he left, he returned to Pluto the magic helmet, to Mercury the winged sandals, and to Minerva the wonderful Aegis. The august goddess of wisdom seemed to have taken a strange fancy to the Gorgon's head, and so Perseus gave her this trophy of his victory, and she fixed it in the middle of her shield. When Perseus with Andromeda and Danae arrived in Argo, they found that old Acrisius had been driven from his throne, and that an usurper was enjoying the kingdom. It did not take long for the hero who had slain Medusa to kill the unlawful claimant and reinstate his grandfather. The old man had been languishing for years in prison, and was hardly able to endure the great joy of his release at the hands of one whom he had long since believed to be dead. Things seemed to be settled very happily in spite of the oracle, but the decrees of the gods are sure to be unfulfilled. Things seemed to settle very happily in spite of the oracle, but the decrees of the gods are sure to be fulfilled. And one day when Perseus was playing quotas, he accidentally threw one wide of the mark. It struck Acrisius, who had been looking on at the game, and it killed him instantly. This unfortunate mishap so preyed upon Perseus's mind that he could not remain in Argo. He exchanged his kingdom for that of Mycenae, over which he ruled for many years very wisely and very well. And when at last Perseus died, the gods placed among him the suitors, with his wife Andromeda, and with Cassiopeia, who had long been since cured of her vanity.